Something was deeply wrong the moment I noticed the driver's side window of the rusted sedan wasn't rolled down, but completely smashed outward from the inside. It was 3:15 a.m. on a desolate, fog-choked stretch of Route 9, miles from any backup. I had pulled the vehicle over for driving without headlights, expecting a standard drunk driver or a tired commuter. Instead, as I stepped out of my cruiser, the heavy night air instantly turned freezing, smelling faintly of old copper and rot. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, illuminating the jagged glass littering the asphalt. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the driver's side. The cabin was pitch black, drowning out the beam of my light. I knocked on the frame, calling out for license and registration. No one moved. But then, a wet, rattling breath echoed from the darkness of the back seat. My hand instinctively dropped to the grip of my service weapon, the cold steel offering zero comfort. I adjusted my flashlight, aiming it directly into the rear of the sedan. The beam revealed a figure sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the bench seat. It was a man, or at least it had the shape of one. He was wearing a filthy, tattered police uniform, identical to mine, but the badge pinned to his chest was warped and melted. His head was tilted backward at an unnatural 90-degree angle, staring blankly at the stained fabric of the car's ceiling. I yelled for him to show me his hands, my voice trembling despite my training. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, the driver's side door suddenly clicked, shifting open an inch. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the woods around us, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine. "Step out of the vehicle, now!" I shouted, backing away and drawing my firearm. The driver's door creaked open fully, whining against its rusted hinges. Nobody stepped out. Instead, the uniform-clad figure in the back seat slowly began to lower its head, turning it toward me with agonizing, jerky movements. I heard the sickening sound of vertebrae popping and grinding together in the dark. When the flashlight illuminated its face, my stomach violently churned. The man had no eyes, just hollow, weeping black sockets. Yet, he was smiling, a wide, impossibly jagged grin that stretched from ear to ear, revealing rows of cracked, blackened teeth. He raised a pale, trembling hand and pointed a finger right at my chest. That's when my police cruiser behind me suddenly died, plunging the entire road into absolute pitch-black darkness. Panic, raw and blinding, seized my entire body. I scrambled backward, clicking my flashlight off and on, but the bulb just flickered weakly before dying completely. The thick fog seemed to press against my skin like a cold, wet blanket. In the blackness, I couldn't see the sedan, nor could I see the smiling monster inside it. But I could hear. I heard the distinct, heavy thud of boots stepping onto the gravel. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was moving toward me, unhurried and deliberate. I raised my weapon, aiming blindly into the dark, my breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Then, a radio clicked to life. It wasn't my radio. The static-laced sound was coming from right in front of my face, mere inches away, and a distorted voice whispered my exact badge number. The whisper was so close, I could feel the frigid moisture of the speaker's breath hit my cheek. Instinct took over. I fired 3 shots into the void. The deafening cracks of my gun lit up the fog in brief, blinding flashes, revealing nothing but empty air. I turned and ran blindly through the mist, my boots pounding against the asphalt. until I stumbled upon an old, overgrown dirt road. I ran until my lungs burned, eventually breaking through the tree line into a clearing. Standing there, swallowed by shadows, was Sector 4's old precinct building, abandoned since a structural fire in the 90s. Desperate to escape whatever was hunting me in the woods, I threw my weight against the rusted side door. It gave way with a loud screech, and I tumbled inside into the suffocating smell of ash and decay.
The heavy door slammed shut behind me with a solid, echoing thud, locking automatically. I was trapped inside the pitch-black, skeletal remains of the precinct. I tapped my flashlight against my palm until the beam flickered back to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the scorched walls. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, layered with decades of dust and peeling paint. I crept down the main hallway, keeping my back to the wall, trying to find a window to break. The air inside was impossibly cold, turning my frantic breaths into thick plumes of white vapor. Suddenly, from deep within the belly of the building, down where the old holding cells used to be, a sound echoed through the vents. It was the frantic tapping of a typewriter, clicking away at an impossible, manic speed. The typing stopped abruptly. In its place, the heavy, metallic clanging of a jail cell door reverberated through the floorboards, vibrating right through the soles of my boots. I froze, holding my breath, forcing myself to listen. From the darkness at the end of the corridor, I heard footsteps. They weren't the heavy, chaotic footsteps of a beast, but the measured, synchronized march of multiple people walking in perfect lockstep. Thud, thud, thud. They were ascending the stairs from the basement cells. My flashlight beam trembled violently as I aimed it toward the stairwell. The air grew so intensely cold that a thin layer of frost began rapidly. Out of the stairwell shadows, 3 figures slowly emerged. They wore old, scorched police uniforms from the 1990s, their bodies horribly burned and blackened from head to toe. Their skin was melted into the fabric, and their faces were featureless masks of charred flesh. Yet their empty, blistered eye sockets fixed entirely on me. In perfect unison, they raised their arms, drawing their rusted, ash-covered service weapons and aiming them directly at my head. I dove into the nearest doorway just as the deafening, synchronized roar of gunfire shattered the silence. Plaster and splinters exploded around me, cutting my face. I scrambled into what appeared to be an old evidence locker, slamming the door shut. But as I turned around, I realized I wasn't alone in the room. Something wet and heavy slid across the floorboards in the far corner of the pitch-black room. I pressed my back hard against the reinforced door, my heart hammering so violently against my ribs I thought it would burst. The deafening gunfire in the hallway had ceased, replaced by a suffocating, dead silence. I raised my trembling flashlight, the frosted lens casting a dim, fractured beam across rows of rusted metal shelving. The shelves were packed with dusty cardboard boxes, old blood-stained weapons, and moldering evidence bags from forgotten cold cases. In the center of the floor sat a massive vintage audio reel-to-reel recorder. The rusted iron spools were spinning entirely on their own, the magnetic tape feeding through the deck with a rhythmic, low-frequency hum that vibrated painfully through my teeth.
The hum from the tape recorder suddenly shifted, transforming into a horrific, distorted scratching noise. I stepped closer, drawn by a morbid, irresistible pull, and shone my light on the spinning plastic reels. A voice began to bleed through the static of the internal speaker. It was my own voice. The audio was a recording of the dispatch call I had made just 20 minutes ago during the traffic stop. I listened in absolute horror as my recorded voice screamed for backup, followed by the agonizing, wet sounds of bone snapping and flesh tearing. Beneath my own recorded screams, a wet, rattling laughter bubbled through the static. Suddenly, The tape violently snapped. The room plunged back into a freezing silence, and the temperature dropped so rapidly that my sweat froze instantly on my skin.
From the shadows beneath the heavy metal shelves, a pale, bloated hand reached out, its fingers twitching erratically. The fingernails were torn off, and the gray skin was waterlogged and sloughing away. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of evidence boxes that crashed loudly to the floor. The flashlight beam illuminated the rest of the entity as it dragged itself out from under the metal structure. It was the corpse of my former training officer, a man who had mysteriously drowned in a swampy lake 5 years ago. His uniform was dripping with foul black swamp water that pooled around his decaying boots. His jaw was unhinged, hanging loosely against his collarbone, and thick, writhing maggots spilled from his open mouth as he began to crawl toward me. I scrambled backward until my spine hit the cold brick wall of the locker, completely cornered. The bloated corpse of my mentor dragged itself closer, leaving a glistening trail of black rot on the floorboards. Outside the heavy door, the synchronized heavy thuds of the charred officer's boots returned, pounding violently against the wood. They began throwing their weight against the door, the metal frame warping and groaning under the immense pressure. I was trapped between a rotting ghost from my past and a squad of melted executioners waiting in the hallway. The door hinges began to pop, sparks flying in the dark as the metal gave way. Just as the door was about to burst completely open, the rotting entity on the floor froze, tilted its head, and pointed directly at a small, rusted vent cover behind me. The heavy metal door exploded inward with a deafening screech of tearing iron. I didn't hesitate. I kicked the rusted vent cover loose and threw my body into the cramped, dust-choked shaft, just as the charred officer surged into the room. The air inside the vent was tight, freezing, and thick with the suffocating stench of old soot. I scrambled on my stomach, scraping my elbows and knees raw against the jagged metal rivets. Behind me, the sound of wet flesh tearing and metallic screeching echoed through the shaft. The melted officers were ripping into the bloated corpse of my former mentor. I clawed my way forward through the darkness, following a faint, pulsing red glow at the far end of the duct. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps as the entire vent line began to shake violently behind me. The shaking grew worse as something massive began crawling into the vent after me, its heavy breathing rattling the metal walls. I threw myself forward, bursting through a loose plastic grate and tumbling hard onto a cold linoleum floor. I scrambled to my feet, shaking, and realized I was standing inside the precinct's main communications hub. It was a graveyard of old tech. Shattered CRT monitors and dead radio consoles lined the walls. But one console in the center was alive, pulsing with that eerie, rhythmic red light. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a live video feed of my own police cruiser parked on Route 9. The camera angle was from inside the car, looking through the windshield. Sitting in my driver's seat, staring directly into the lens with that impossibly wide, jagged smile, was me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, freezing the blood in my veins. The entity on the screen shifted, lifting my stolen radio microphone to its pale lips. Instantly, the radio console in front of me sputtered to life, broadcasting the creature's voice into the room. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. The driver has been dealt with. I'm returning to the station now." The voice was an exact, flawless replica of my own. On the monitor, I watched the doppelgänger shift the cruiser into drive. It turned the steering wheel, pulling away from the desolate highway and heading straight toward the dirt road leading to this very building. The heavy, frantic scratching inside the vent behind me
suddenly stopped. A horrifying, absolute silence fell over the room as the video feed showed my cruiser pulling into the clearing outside.
The headlights of my own cruiser cut through the dust-covered windows of the communications hub, blinding me. The engine died, and the headlights vanished, plunging me back into the suffocating red glow of the console. Outside the room, the heavy front doors of the precinct creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and identical to my own stride, began to echo down the main hallway, moving directly toward the communications room. I drew my service weapon one last time, aiming it at the door, my hand shaking so violently the barrel rattled against the console. The doppelganger's voice suddenly echoed from the hallway just outside, completely unamplified by any radio. "I'm home," it whispered. The doorknob began to slowly turn, and the final red light on the console went